sure that you like and follow us so you don't miss our next episode. Today we have Kirsten Wilson.
Hi.
And Kirsten, introduce your desk.
So I'm Kirsten Wilson with Lawyers Title, and I'm introducing Tim Muse with Empire Title. And Tim is the Chief Title Officer for Empire Title.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked you to come back because you're just a wealth of information. I've worked with Tim for years and years. I wanted you to talk about today legal access.
Okay.
Because that seems to be an issue with some people moving here or after they buy a piece of property. What does that mean, legal access?
Okay. Well, let's put a little spin on this. Since I'm not an attorney, let's shy away from the word legal access, and let's do insurable access.
Oh, insurable.
Since I'm more qualified to speak on insurable access, which is actually in the marketplace probably what everybody's needing
Refers
to have
to, yeah.
because when you buy and sell, you need insurable access. So
What
let's
is-
talk about that.
Okay, insurable access. What does the insurable access mean?
Okay. Well, there was a time back in the day that title policies did not insure your access. They only insured the title to your property. I think it was late 80s, if I remember right, when the title policy started insuring access as a standard coverage. So
I could buy property and not have.
yeah, so if you were insured prior to the 80s, your access probably wasn't a covered item in the title policy.
Okay.
So now, of course, we have to not only check your title check your title on your property, we have to make sure you can get there.
Okay, but I do know, and you tell me if I'm mistaken, at one time you could sell property that did not have access.
People do.
Yes.
And it's a little bit of a,
But they'll
do I
tell
call it
you.
an urban myth maybe? For lack of a better
Urban
word.
legend,
Urban
urban
legend.
legend.
Thank you. People do.
Okay.
And when it comes to title insurance, we show that a lack of
Access.
and lack of access on the title policy, and the buyers have to accept that, and sometimes they do,
And sometimes. Well,
and sometimes it kills the sale.
And what
But,
I
yeah.
always hear is, but there's a dirt road right to that property, and you're like,
So you have physical access.
but,
Yeah.
but that does not
Until
mean
someone puts a gate up.
But that doesn't mean you have access just because there's a dirt road going.
Right, and I have talked to many people that says, well, I can drive there. I said, today?
That's a really good way to put it.
I mean, the title insurer wants to ensure that you can drive there forever
Right.
to the property. And so, we have to check it. Best case scenario is the property is on a dedicated street. Piece of cake. Sometimes, many times, properties are not on a dedicated street. The next best scenario is a piece of property is connected to a dedicated street by an easement,
Okay.
by a good quality easement that can be insured. And of course, worst case scenario, it's out in the middle of nowhere and it has no access across, no easements across anything to get to it. Sometimes that properties in the Forest Service, if it's on a Forest Service numbered road, most underwriters will be fine with insuring access if the property abuts on a numbered Forest Service road. And they usually have an exception on the policy. It's something like terms and conditions of the put on the property by the U.S. Forest Service by reason of traveling on their roads to get the property, something like that. Very paraphrased.
So that's why sometimes you see these private road agreements. Is that right?
True. A lot of times the private road agreements include rights of ingress and egress, and then sometimes the private road agreements are just basically maintenance too. So,
but those aren't easements though, right?
No. I mean, they can be dependent on the content of the agreement. It can be if the content is actually granting them ingress egress, then we can use that to ensure the access on the property. If it's just maintenance, we usually need a little bit more.
Okay, I'm gonna back you up. So
Yeah.
if I live in our forest, because we're surrounded by beautiful forest here, and there's a Forest Service road numbered, that means I have access to, if my property abuts that road, I have access to my property.
Subject to the rules and regulations of the Forest Service, yes.
So I'd have to
qualify that.
verify them.
Well,
And then even if it's insurable access, does that mean it's drivable?
No, not always, because it depends on your coverage. There are certain, like a standard coverage, basically, for the lack of a better word, paper access, is you may have a recorded easement to get to your property. Sometimes that recorded easement goes over a cliff. And you really can't drive on it.
Not even with four-wheel drive.
So, I mean, that's insurable access on a standard coverage policy, but then you have other types of policies that are more in depth, like a Alta homeowners policy or an extended owners policy, where they're actually ensuring not only do you have legal access to the property, you have physical access, and they're the same.
Okay.
Oh, nice.
So there is coverages for that kind of thing. So there's extra steps that we do to ensure that that your easement isn't going off of a cliff, that you can actually drive on it.
Now, we get calls, and I'm sure you guys do too, saying, okay, well, they have this dirt road that they're using to get to the property, but the access is actually behind the property. So can I just use that dirt road as my access?
Your insurance is going to be based on what's of record. Now, what you're using, that'll all depend on, you know, the people that own the property that you're driving across. You know, you get into prescriptive easements and different things like that, which is more of a legal arena thing. But yeah, it's you can't really depend on that physical access that's undocumented, if you know, versus the access that is documented.
Well, and I'm sure you've even had the call saying, well, I was using that road because that's how I got to the property, but now the neighbors put a fence up, and I've even seen them move rocks in front of it.
I've seen old cars.
Yes, yes, it becomes very emotional. And then they call us and they're like, well, that's my access. And when you start looking at it, you're like, not technically, it's not.
It's not of what's of record. And what usually triggers things like that is you may have two neighbors live side by side for years, and they're fine with driving.
They're friends.
They're friends, they've known each other, everything's cool. But once that sells to a third party that this person doesn't have a relationship with, many times that's when it triggers, like a fence or digging a ditch across it, or rocks.
Some kind of
It's
action.
the sale,
Yeah.
a lot of times is what triggers it. And the bad thing is we have to make our decision on access before the sale closes.
Right.
And the action that triggers, the event that may trigger this blockage happens after the close of escrow. So yeah, it can get pretty sticky, and the timing, it could not be worse for a title insurer. That you wish that the trigger point was before they close, so we could like, oh, okay. So yeah, and a lot of times what triggers things too is maybe there's a road that feeds to a bunch of different properties that are vacant.
Right.
So, you know, hardly anybody drives by there, and maybe a weekend or a visitor or something. But so what happens is someone may buy that property and say, I'm going to build on it. So here comes the equipment driving across. That's another trigger point, because before they didn't really care. There was a car every once in a blue moon, and now there's a constant barrage of equipment. Then they start saying, hey, I don't think this road is actually a recorded road. So they start checking into it, and maybe they find out it's not. So then they start. Then that's that trigger point, is you got your house started, and so very important. Access is very important, because you really need to get to your property.
So on your title insurance, does it give you a map, a drawing of that access?
There again, you know, like I was talking about the legal thing, then we talking about the surveyor. If there, I don't have a surveyor's license, but if there is a record of survey, I can certainly supply it. But I don't have either a law license or a surveyor license, so I really can't plot things.
Right.
And but we do.
Because that's a challenge for the realtor.
Sure.
When you're out showing property and you're like, yeah, here's a dirt road that leads right up to it.
We can talk about it.
Yeah.
I can't actually.
In truth be told, none of the title companies will plot
I don't know that for a fact. I think some may skirt more on the
Okay.
edge
But
of.
a good reason to do a survey though.
It's a very excellent.
If you
reason to
don't,
do a
if you don't
survey.
know.
Yeah, and what I always suggest to people too, especially if they're buying unsubdivided land, and if they're going to be a survey involved anyway, so let me know the name of your surveyor. I will send the surveyor my title report, all the different exception documents, so they can look at it. And sometimes surveyors may charge a little extra, and sometimes they don't. It just depends. If the customer requests, many times the surveyor will dot in those easements if he's going to do a plat
Wow.
for you anyway.
Sure.
It doesn't hurt to ask.
Mhm.
And like I say, sometimes they don't charge extra, sometimes we charge a little bit extra, but even if it's a
It's
little bit
worth
extra,
it.
it's worth it.
Yeah.
Well, and I would recommend recording it.
Oh, yeah.
Because
yeah.
it makes it easier for when you go to sell that property and you actually.
It's always there,
You
yeah.
show that it's there. and
Because
you
we see this in Walker and Jerome sometimes.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
Which is I just know is your favorite
Beautiful
area.
they're beautiful places, but sometimes they're more, a little more risk involved and a lot more in-depth research that we have
Well,
to
I
do. in
remember
places like
knocking
that.
on doors and asking for permission, can we do a right of way or grant
Yeah.
access?
Right.
For a property we're trying to sell that might be behind them.
Right,
Yeah,
no.
that happens a lot, yeah.
And it's not uncommon. I mean, as much as we've grown, you still see it today.
Right.
So, now, do you as an agent have a lot of clients coming in, and do they even consider looking for access?
Well, you have to bring it up because where they're from in other places,
Not
it's
an
not an
issue.
issue. And then, of course, they come here and it's an issue, and then, there's a septic they don't know anything about, there's a water well, there's a mobile home, the next thing you know, they don't know what they're doing. So it's up to the agent really to educate them and get them on track.
So that's just another advantage of using a local agent because
Absolutely.
they know stuff, that not everybody would know.
Well, and
They're like, oh, we better question this, or we better check into this.
well, most of the offices and the associations will tell you, if you're not familiar with that area, you should not work with that client. You should refer them or bring in another agent that's familiar with the area,
Yeah.
just because of that.
Yeah, things like that.
And like you said, lawsuits in real estate, they're usually 13 months after the closing,
That's how it happens, but yes, you're
It
absolutely
does.
right.
It does. It's after it's all said and done. There's your trigger point.
So then let me ask you this, because I know when you and I worked years and years ago at TransNation.
Back when I had hair.
You look good.
Oh, they do.
We had insured on a piece of property over in Sedona, and I think it was a commercial property, but it had access, but when you actually went out there, it was a big cliff ravine.
All right.
Oh.
Yeah.
Does this ring any bells to you?
Probably because I remember they'd send me to Sedona all the time.
Yeah,
and,
and-
check out stuff.
and
We
then-
had paper access.
We had paper access, but then shortly thereafter, I think there was a suit, and as TransNation, we had to cover it because they didn't have legal access to it.
Right.
I mean, they physically couldn't drive there without building like a bridge, and this was what you told me was this huge ravine. You can't get in, you can't get out, and I'm like, well, can you come another way? No, this is the only way. And so it becomes a real big issue, especially when you're showing and they're writing a contract.
Right.
And if it's commercial, they probably had like an extended coverage that did ensure not only the legal access, paper access, but the physical access too. So that's probably what happened.
And we recommend them doing an ALTA survey then.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
huge.
that's the Cadillac of surveys. I mean,
Yeah,
they're expensive.
very expensive.
Have you guys seen a lot of surveys around lately? I have not.
No.
You mean
I
of record?
haven't. I
Right.
mean, well, not, I mean, in the transaction.
Oh, in the transaction.
Yeah, where the buyer, the seller's providing or getting a survey.
Not
Usually,
nearly enough.
no, usually.
Not nearly enough.
You
Yeah,
guys
I'm
just mark
surprised.
the pins. You're like,
We,
tell them
we,
where the pins are.
we used to see radon test a lot,
Yeah.
and now we're moving into areas that never been tested before.
Oh.
it's
You know,
newly
and
subdivided
some of those
areas.
areas never had mold tests, radon tests, water tests, surveys,
Wow.
access, and so that's all kind of something that we need to keep on top of.
Yeah.
So
No. So when you guys do, because you go out and make sure you have physical access, do you actually go out and look at that?
If it's the type of coverage, if it's that type of coverage and we're concerned about it and I'm unfamiliar with the property or the area, yeah, I'll go out and do a field check on it. check it out.
Wow.
That's good.
Yeah, get the boss out of the office.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, hold my calls. I'm out of here.
That's the reason why you drive a truck. I got it
love my
now.
truck.
I
Yeah.
got it now.
Yeah.
So if they do need to find out if they have access, how do they go about doing that? I mean, they go to their agent and they're going to ask, but the agent in turn is going to call our title
I
company
get calls and emails
all the
all the
time.
time, and
Yeah.
and I could say, and if we're not doing a full examination search of the title, I can do a cursory look,
Yeah.
and I tell them, I said, well, I've done a cursory look, and it looks like it's here, but I mean that still doesn't compare with the when we do a title report and we dive full in and get all the records and going through the microfilm and this and that and the other. That's where we find everything.
Right.
But we do cursory searches all the time for people.
So would it be a benefit for like a listing agent, especially in some of these
If they
outlying
have a
areas,
concern, yeah.
to request the seller to do a survey?
If there's a concern, oh yeah. I mean,
So what's the solution if a buyer did buy a house or some land and found out that they didn't have physical access, but paper access that's not usable?
it is get real friendly with your neighbor.
Yeah.
Bake them cookies and,
Start being
just
really
say,
kind,
hey,
Would you mind?
why don't we see if we can maybe document this access, this access that's been used forever.
Steve mentioned road agreements.
Right.
Now, and you said road agreements sometimes but not always have access.
Right.
What would be the purpose of a road agreement then?
It's probably maintenance. For
Oh.
maintenance, a lot of road agreements involve maintenance. Like, we agree to grade the road once a year, and a lot of lenders require some kind of maintenance agreements if their appraisal shows it's not on a county road or a city
Designated road.
designated road.
Yeah.
And so that's where a lot of the road maintenance agreements and agreements stem from, is because usually it's a lender requirement.
Okay.
They want somebody to say, okay, hey, I'll be responsible to.
And
keep
it's
the road.
usually dirt roads that you
Usually
see a
dirt
lot.
I was just getting ready to say
Usually
that
dirt
all
roads.
the roads in Coyote Springs that are dirt,
Yeah.
they're all road agreements.
That's true, because with the exception of Coyote Springs Road, which is
Right.
now a county road, everything is those private easements that go along the original perimeters of the original parcels. Yeah, you're right.
And that was a lender agreement, the last deal I did,
Yeah.
so.
They make it a requirement. So, and you're absolutely right. If you don't have physical access, you got to become friends. And then how just
And I always say, well, don't ask them to give you something. Just say, could we document this?
Yeah.
And then
It'd be a benefit
it
for
doesn't
everybody.
seem like, I'm giving something away. We're just documenting it.
No.
Yeah, well, that makes sense, that's a good approach.
Yeah.
Now, if they document it and they have that piece of paper, is that all they need?
Sometimes.
Sometimes?
Yeah, I always want to remind people that if the neighbor agrees to give them an easement, if the neighbor has a mortgage on the property, and if that mortgage, God forbid, forecloses on that property, then that easement's wiped away. Because
wow.
your
Yeah.
deed of trust mortgage is here,
Right,
because it's all in priority.
Right.
Anything that's recorded after is in a lesser priority, like say they have a second mortgage, like a credit line or something, and whatever else they've done. But if that easement happens after that mortgage, then if that mortgage gets foreclosed on, everything behind it goes away. So if you can, then you'd want to try to get not only the easement signed by the landowner, but a consent to the easement signed by the mortgage holder.
wow.
So then if the mortgage holder consents, then it doesn't
It
do
don't
that.
really-
Yeah.
It doesn't go away if it goes
Doesn't
into
go away.
foreclosure, yeah, which is a scary part because you could have it but not really have it if something.
Yeah, you have it for a while and you're like, oh, oops.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, when I talk to them about it, we never thought about it. So I think it's well worth bringing up.
It is, and most people aren't aware of it either, so I appreciate the information.
Yeah. So, like I say, unless you have a helicopter, you need a way to get to your property.
Well, and local title company, because we do see out in the area
True,
title companies,
true.
they really not familiar with it.
No, they're not.
Local realtor,
Yes.
hopefully someone that has local
Local
experience.
lender.
Local lender, also.
Use local.
Yeah,
You know, when you do local, there's not some, a lot of knowledge there that you can't like bottle up and give to somebody else. And
Well, and-
it's just people things that was here
Right.
that maybe somebody in, Texas doesn't
doesn't understand.
know or
Right.
to even bring up the
Well,
question.
I'll even go even in Phoenix doesn't understand.
Sure.
Right,
Yeah,
sure.
especially because of our area being so diversified in our type of property, it's, yeah.
Well, we have all these iBuyers and all that going on. They really, it's kind of scary to look at,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, but it's these are all good things you brought up. So yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
We appreciate you being here,
You're welcome.
and we're gonna have you back
Have me back.
Again,
again.
so.
Grill me. And grill me.
Well, thanks, Tim, for being on the show.
Oh, you're welcome.
Kirsten,
My
as
pleasure.
always, thank you.
Thank you.
And remember to like and follow us, and thanks for watching this episode of Prescott Gallery of Homes.